The bright yellow violation notice stuck to our front door made my blood boil. It was the fifth HOA violation this month. All about my sister Sarah's wheelchair ramp. I crumpled it up and tossed it into the growing pile of Karen Thompson's official warnings. Behind me, I heard the familiar whir of Sarah's electric wheelchair as she rolled up the ramp, her movements slower than usual after a long day at work. "Another love letter from our wonderful HOA president?" Sarah asked, flashing me a tired smile. The dark circles under her eyes told me how exhausted she was. Not just from her new job, not just from the car accident that put her in a wheelchair 6 months ago, but from Karen's constant harassment. "You'd think being HOA president would keep her busy enough without stalking our house," I muttered, peeking through the kitchen window. Sure enough, there she was. Karen stood in her driveway, her designer workout outfit perfectly coordinated with her fake concerned frown. She held up her phone, snapping photo after photo of our ramp, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the sunlight as if she were some suburban overlord. I remembered the day we installed the ramp. We followed every rule in the book, hired a licensed contractor, got the proper city permits, even painted it gray to match our house trim. But Karen showed up before the concrete had even dried, clutching the HOA rulebook like a holy text. Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states that all external modifications must be approved by the board, she had said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We have to maintain our property values, you understand." I clenched my jaw at the memory. What really got under my skin was how Karen always scheduled HOA meetings about our ramp at times Sarah couldn't attend. Not that my sister had much time for neighborhood politics. She was too busy running the state. "Yeah, that's right. Sarah isn't just any homeowner. She's the governor." But we had kept that quiet, wanting to protect her privacy during her recovery. Last week, I caught Karen measuring the ramp with a tape measure at 6 a.m. When I confronted her, she had the nerve to say she was just doing her duty. That's when I started documenting everything. Videos of her snooping, copies of her notices, a detailed log of every interaction. Something told me we'd need it. This morning was different, though. As I helped Sarah into her car for her physical therapy appointment, I noticed Karen huddled with two men in suits near her house. She was pointing at our ramp and gesturing dramatically. One of them was taking notes. The other was snapping pictures. "I don't like this," I muttered. "Maybe it's time we let them know who they're really dealing with." Sarah shook her head. "I won't use my position for special treatment. We'll handle this the right way." But as I watched Karen's triumphant smirk, my gut told me, following the rules might not be enough this time. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Karen's voice carried across the yard in the morning breeze. "Yes, we'll need that bulldozer here first thing tomorrow morning. The board has already approved the removal." My heart stopped. They wouldn't really tear down a wheelchair ramp, would they? As Sarah's car disappeared around the corner, I rushed inside to check our security cameras and grab our folder of permits. But when I opened our files, I found something that would change everything. Something that would make Karen wish she had never heard of us. I was eating breakfast when I heard the rumbling of heavy machinery outside. My spoon clattered against the bowl as I rushed to the window, and my heart nearly stopped. Karen stood in our front yard, wearing her signature red blazer and that smug expression she always wore at HOA meetings. A bulldozer sat in our driveway, its metal blade gleaming menacingly. Two workers in orange vests measured the ramp with bright yellow tape measures. Karen clutched a stack of papers to her chest, like they were some kind of golden decree. I grabbed my phone and hit record as I stormed outside. The morning sun had barely risen, and most of our neighbors were still asleep. Karen's face lit up with that fake smile she always wore when she was about to ruin someone's day. "Oh, good, you're home," she chirped, strutting toward me in heels that sank slightly into our fresh grass. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. Karen waved a paper in my face, but pulled it back before I could grab it. "I have here an emergency order from the HOA board," she said sweetly. "This structure is in direct violation of community guidelines, Section 4.23. I took a deep breath, just like Sarah had taught me during her campaign speeches. "Karen, we submitted all the proper paperwork. We have approval from the city." She tilted her head, her fake smile never wavering. "The city isn't the HOA, dear." I clenched my fists. "This ramp is an eyesore," Karen continued. It's bringing down property values. Just look at how it clashes with the neighborhood aesthetic. The bulldozer revved its engine, and my stomach dropped. I pulled up the property maps on my phone, the one Sarah had made me save, showing our property lines and permits. "This is illegal," I said, my voice stronger now. "You can't just demolish someone's property without proper notice or a court order." Karen laughed, a high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. "Notice was given 3 weeks ago via certified mail," she said smugly. She pulled out another paper showing a signature I had never seen before. I frantically dialed Sarah's number, straight to voicemail. Of course, she was in that closed-door budget meeting today. I tried her assistant, her security team. No answer. The construction workers started placing orange cones around our driveway. One of them, a young guy with a clipboard, checked his paperwork multiple times, looking uncertain. He whispered to his colleague, pointing at something that clearly didn't sit right with him. "If you do this," I warned, "you'll be hearing from our lawyers. This is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." I lifted my phone higher, making sure to catch every detail on live stream. Karen's smile finally faltered. "Just for a second. The HOA is exempt from— No HOA is exempt from federal law," I shouted, loud enough that lights started coming on in neighboring houses. I saw our elderly neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, peek out his front door. Then he disappeared back inside. Karen turned to the bulldozer operator, giving him a sharp nod. The machine roared to life. The blade lowered. My heart pounded as the metal scraped against the ramp. "Last chance, Karen." I held my phone steady. "You're making a huge mistake." Karen turned back to me, her eyes cold despite the smile still on her face. "The only mistake was allowing this monstrosity to be built in the first place," she said. "Sometimes people need to learn that rules exist for a reason." The bulldozer blade caught the edge of the ramp with a horrible screech of metal on concrete. Chunks of our carefully constructed ramp began to crumble. What Karen didn't notice was that Mr. Rodriguez had returned with his own camera. More neighbors began gathering, phones raised. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah's head of security. "Stay calm. Keep recording. Help is 3 minutes out." A smile spread across my face for the first time that morning. Karen was so focused on her victory that she didn't notice. The black SUVs turning onto our street. The distant wail of sirens growing louder. Karen was about to learn something very, very important. Sometimes the biggest mistakes come from the smallest bits of missing information, like not knowing that your seemingly ordinary neighbor is actually one of the most powerful people in the state. And Karen was about to learn that lesson. The hard way. I'll never forget the moment our quiet suburban street turned into what looked like a scene from a movie. Karen was still high-fiving her crony HOA board members, celebrating the destruction of Sarah's wheelchair ramp when the first black SUV rounded the corner. Then another, and another. Red and blue lights flashed across the neighborhood as 3 state police cruisers pulled up, followed by 5 identical government vehicles. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows now spilled onto their front lawns, murmuring to each other. Even Karen's loyal supporters looked nervous. Karen, however, squared her shoulders and marched toward the officers. "What is all this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "This is a private neighborhood matter." That's when the center SUV's back door opened. The street fell into dead silence. Sarah rolled out in her wheelchair, wearing her official governor's blazer, her expression as cold as steel. Her security team formed a protective wall around her as she moved forward with calculated precision. Karen stumbled back, her face flickering between shock and terror. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah's voice rang out, "this became a state matter the moment you violated federal disability protection laws." Karen's jaw dropped. Sarah rolled closer. "Not to mention," she added, "destroying state property without authorization." Karen blinked rapidly. "State property?" Sarah nodded. "Yes." She pulled out her phone. "Would you like to see the deed, or should we discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act first?" The crowd of neighbors grew larger. At least a dozen were now recording everything. Even Mrs. Jenkins from across the street had gone live on Facebook. Karen clutched her violation notices, her hands shaking. But the HOA bylaws clearly state— "Interesting you should mention that," Sarah cut in, motioning to her assistant, who stepped forward with a thick binder. My legal team has been reviewing your HOA's bylaws all afternoon. Would you like to know what we found? The HOA board members behind Karen started backing away. Smart move. Sarah flipped open the binder. Multiple violations of state housing laws, discriminatory practices, irregular financial records going back 3 years. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. I zoomed in on Karen's face with my phone, her expression turning whiter than the violation notices she loves so much. This isn't... I didn't know, Karen stammered. That I was the governor? Sarah finished for her. Karen gulped. Or that bulldozing a disabled person's access ramp without proper notice or permits is a federal offense? 2 state investigators stepped forward, notebooks in hand. Behind them, news vans were pulling up. The flashing cameras made it clear this was about to go national. Mrs. Thompson, one investigator said, we'll need you to come with us to answer some questions about today's events and these financial discrepancies. Karen froze. She looked to her board members for help, but they were already gone. Then she looked at me. I smiled. And just like that, Karen was escorted away, still muttering about property values and HOA bylaws. The neighborhood cheered. Sarah turned toward the gathered crowd. Even surrounded by the wreckage of her demolished wheelchair ramp, she looked like the strongest person in the world. My fellow neighbors, she began, her voice clear and strong, today we have an opportunity to discuss what community really means. She gestured toward the destroyed ramp. This isn't just about me or my access to my home. This is about every person's right to live with dignity in their own community. A wave of understanding washed over the crowd. Karen had been getting away with this for years, but no more. The aftermath. A neighborhood reborn. The morning after the bulldozing incident, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Our security camera footage had gone viral overnight. News vans were lined up outside our house. But that wasn't even the craziest part. An old high school friend, now a civil rights lawyer, called me with shocking news. Karen had been sued 3 times before for similar stunts in other neighborhoods. Each time, she had settled quietly and moved on. This time, however, she had picked the wrong house. Sarah, being the amazing governor she is, didn't just get mad. She got organized. She held a press conference on our front lawn with the destroyed ramp behind her. The reporters went wild when she revealed Karen had broken 17 state housing regulations. She had been illegally targeting disabled and elderly residents. She had been using HOA fines to pay for her own home renovations. The neighborhood changed overnight. One by one, our elderly neighbors stepped forward with their own stories. Mrs. Chen had been forced to remove her medical garden. Mr. Rodriguez had been fined for installing a wheelchair lift for his veteran father. The Wilson family had been threatened over their autistic son's sensory-friendly playground equipment. And just when we thought things couldn't get more insane, someone leaked Karen's HOA financial records. The truth? Karen had been stealing from the HOA for years. When the HOA's lawyer quit on the spot and 3 board members resigned, we knew this was over. Karen still tried to fight. She showed up at our house with a cease and desist letter demanding we stop spreading lies. She walked right into a meeting between Sarah and the state housing commissioner. Her face turned purple when she realized her career in HOA politics was dead. 2 days later, we watched Karen pack up her house. Her prized rose bushes, the ones she had forced everyone to copy, were the last thing she put in her car. As she drove away, the news helicopters above captured something poetic. Her house was the only one on the street without a support-accessible housing sign in the yard. The lesson: real change takes a ramp and a community. The new HOA board is amazing. Instead of fining people, they now help them. They rebuilt Sarah's ramp, but this time it was better than before. Local artists painted it with beautiful flowers. Soft lights made it glow at night. Kids from the neighborhood thought it was the prettiest thing on the street. And then, the biggest surprise, Sarah introduced a new state law, the Right to Home Happiness Act. It protects homeowners from HOA abuse and ensures disabled residents can live with dignity. But the real victory wasn't the new law. It was watching Mrs. Rodriguez's garden gnome army grow bigger every week. It was seeing kids play freely in their yards without fear of a violation notice. It was helping a new family move in last week. They had 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a wheelchair ramp for their grandmother. Nobody complained. Instead, 5 neighbors showed up to help them unpack. Because we didn't just change an HOA, we changed minds.